Interoception is having a moment. The skyrocketing popularity of this eighth sense likely stems from its effectiveness in putting words to the importance of deep and personal sensations like hunger, fatigue, raised heart rate, and pain. But while these sensations seem universal, in reality, there are vast differences in how and to what degree we each experience the components of interoception. And what's especially interesting is how these differences relate to emotional regulation. We are still in the early stages of this research, but early stage studies seem to be showing that interoceptive awareness can be improved. And this improvement appears to correlate with improved emotional regulation, even in individuals who are not explicitly working on emotional regulation. In today's episode, we'll be looking at research involving a school-based program that led to improvements in both interoception and emotional regulation. Then after we review this article, I am so thankful to welcome to the podcast Kelly Mahler, OTD, OTRL. Kelly is the lead author of this paper and one of the pioneering researchers on practical implications of interoception for occupational therapy professionals as well as other health professionals. So let's dive in. Welcome to the OT Potential Podcast, where we review new and influential OT journal articles, then invite on an expert guest to help us pull out actionable takeaways that you can implement in your practice starting today. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Lyon, and I am a licensed occupational therapist. Before we dive into this big topic of OT and interoception, I wanted to let you know that this podcast may qualify as continuing education for you. You are probably listening to this podcast on a free podcast platform, but to gain continuing education credit, you will need to be a member of the OT Potential Club, our OT continuing education platform. Bearing in mind that this could count as a CEU course, I wanted to state our 2 learning objectives so you can be thinking about them throughout the podcast today. Our first learning objective is you will be able to identify assessments that occupational therapy professionals can use related to interoception. And second, you will be able to recognize research-backed interoception interventions. So let's begin by looking at this journal article, and then we will bring on Kelly to discuss how this research could play out in your practice. The article that we are reviewing today is called An Interoception-Based Intervention for Improving Emotional Regulation in Children in a Special Education Classroom, a feasibility study. This article comes to us from Occupational Therapy in Healthcare, and it was published in 2024. So the article begins with this introduction to what is interoception. Interoception is a network of senses that support the detection, interpretation, and reaction to internal sensations. It is the mechanism behind self-awareness of sensations like pain, body temperature, hunger or fullness, thirst, sexual arousal, illness, the need for urination and defecation, and the need for sleep. Looking at interoception and emotional regulation, the author shared that the detection and interpretation of physiological changes, especially increases in intensity, is key to successful emotional regulation. And the inverse is also true. When people are unable to or struggle to notice or interpret their interoceptive body signals, they miss crucial cues for successfully understanding and regulating their emotions. In a previous study, Kelly and her fellow authors explained this difference in interoceptive awareness as it relates to autistic children who may experience alexithymia, aka difficulty with identifying feelings and, more specifically, identifying and describing emotions. Researchers approximate that 1 in 10 individuals can experience alexithymia, and the rate is even higher in people who are neurodivergent, have experienced trauma, and or have a mental diagnosis. I want to step back from the article for just a second here too and call out that in our discussion with Kelly, we are going to be talking about this term alexithymia and how she has updated her use and her understanding of it. So there's definitely some nuance around this that I want to call out now, and then we'll get to more in depth later in the podcast. But coming back to the article and looking at emotional regulation in schools. In a school environment, emotional dysregulation can lead to outward behaviors like outbursts, aggression, refusals, self-injury, and impulsivity. And historically, these outward behaviors have been addressed with behavior-based interventions. But the authors of this paper argue that these interventions do not address the underlying challenges, one of which may be a difference in interoception. In fact, behavior-based interventions may teach children to further ignore their internal feelings and instead focus only on behaviors, even when those behaviors do not match their internal experience. So given our expanded understanding of how interoception impacts emotional regulation, interoception-based interventions may be a more effective option. Initial small-scale studies support this hypothesis. I will link to both of these in our show notes. One is called The Impact of an Interoception-Based Program on Emotional Regulation in Autistic Children from 2022. And an older one is called An Interoception-Based Intervention for Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder from 2020. However, both of these studies were small and the population was limited only to autistic children. So there is need for much more research, and in particular, expanding our idea of who this program might be effective for, which leads us to the intent of this specific research that we're looking at today. The purpose of this study was to determine if there were changes in interoceptive awareness and emotional regulation following an interoception intervention in a special education classroom of students with several diagnoses. Looking at their methods, this study used a one-group pre-test, post-test design to compare scores on measures of interoception and emotional regulation. The participants were 9 students ages 11 to 14 in a middle school special education classroom. Consent was obtained from both the students and their parents. Looking at outcome measures to measure interoceptive awareness, the authors use an adapted version of the interoceptive awareness interview. This is a self-report, and it is a sub-assessment of the comprehensive assessment of interoceptive awareness. And I want to call out that this assessment was actually authored by Kelly, and we will be talking about it a little bit more in our discussion. And also in this study, emotional regulation was assessed using the Emotional Regulation Index. This is a teacher report that is a subtest of the Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Function, version 2. Looking at the intervention, participants engaged in one 30-minute session per week for 7 weeks. All 7 modules were conducted within the participants' special education classroom and co-led by the same therapists. The weekly topics were based on the Interoception Curriculum. Week 1 focused on hands, fingers, and feet and toes. Week 2 focused on ears and voice. Week 3 was mouth and stomach. Week 4, eyes and nose. Week 5, heart and lungs. Week 6, brain. And week 7, skin and muscles. Participants began each session by reviewing and brainstorming interoceptive words related to the body part. You can find a preview of what this looked like on Kelly's website, and I will be linking to that in our show notes. After this, participants completed a series of activities designed to evoke interoception sensations related to the body part. These activities gave participants practice with noticing and describing sensations. As I was digging around on her website, some of the examples that I saw previewed were things like put your hands in warm water for 15 seconds, or put your hands in cold water for 15 seconds, or shake your hands fast for 15 seconds. And again, activities like this gave the participants opportunities to notice and express what those sensations were that they were feeling. Additionally, a body check chart iPad app was introduced during the first sessions, following in-session activities and at least 2 other times per school day. The app prompted the participant to focus on a specific body part, notice how it felt in the moment, and select a matching descriptor term. So what were the results from this intervention? Statistically significant improvements were observed in the interoceptive awareness interview and the emotional regulation index. As we head into the discussion of this paper, this was the first study of its kind to find that interoceptive awareness and emotional regulation can be improved in children in a mixed diagnosis special education setting through the use of the interoceptive curriculum. And what is really interesting to note is that during the weekly intervention sessions, the OTs did not discuss emotions or emotional regulation. And yet somehow we saw that statistically significant increase on the assessment. So while the transferability of this research is limited and more rigorous designs are needed, the current study does provide preliminary support that interoception interventions focused on noticing and understanding sensations may implicitly lead to greater emotional awareness and regulation. I personally was on such a learning curve diving into this article and some of the surrounding research. In this upcoming interview, you're going to hear me struggling to even remember some of the terms that we just talked about because they were all so new to me. And that I just really needed Kelly to help walk me through some of the implications from this because it's so exciting. And I think OTs are so well positioned to really wrap our minds around it. But at the same time, it's kind of a new way of thinking about how we process things and how that relates to our emotions. So as a quick introduction to Kelly, Kelly Mahler, OTD, OTRL, earned a doctorate in occupational therapy from Misericordia University, Dallas, PA. She has been an occupational therapist for 20 years, serving school-aged children as well as adults. Kelly is the winner of multiple awards, including the 2020 American Occupational Therapy Association Emerging and Innovative Practice Award and a Mom's Choice Gold Medal. She is an adjunct faculty member at Elizabethtown College in Elizabethtown, PA, as well as at Misericordia University in Dallas, PA. Kelly is a co-principal investigator in several research projects pertaining to topics such as interoception, self-regulation, trauma, and autism. And as a financial disclosure, Kelly is an author of the Interoceptive Curriculum, which was studied in this research paper. She is also the author of the Comprehensive Assessment of Interoceptive Awareness and Other Research, which she sells on her website, kellymahler.com. She also sells multiple courses on interoception. And in our upcoming discussion, you'll get to hear how Kelly balances creating and studying resources and just what drives her to do so. So without further ado, I am so thankful to patch Kelly into this podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Kelly. It's great to have you.
Oh, thanks, Sarah, for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
My mind has just been swimming the past couple of weeks. I think before reading this paper, I thought of interoception as like a sensory difference that some people have, and it's good to understand so we can accommodate for differences. But there seems to be something even more interesting going on with this connection to emotional regulation and there's more power in interoception than I realized. And I'm so just excited to dive into the details of that. But before we get there, I want to hear a little bit about your story and just how you got to this work. I feel like we're close to the same age, and I was not talking about this stuff in OT school, or if we did, I forgot about it. So how did you find it, and how did you get going on this journey?
Yeah. I mean, I've been practicing for 22 years. And when I was in OT school 22 years ago, interoception was not a part of my OT schooling at all. I went to Misericordia University, and the program was just so deeply rooted in mental health, as it should be, because, occupational therapy, we are mental health providers. And it also just gave me this interest in sensory processing. And so I had this whole mental health training, really interested in it when I got out of school. And I love sensory processing. So those were the key areas I was supporting in my clients. I primarily worked in the school setting for most of my career. And so the schools I was contracting with, they kept sending me these really tricky students, the students they couldn't figure out. They had quote unquote challenging behaviors, that they've tried all their behavioral interventions and things just weren't, going well. And so I'm I'd love to try to support these students and see if I can help them, be more comfortable and successful in their school setting. So I was like really trying all the things that were available out there in terms of mental health, emotion regulation, sensory processing. And my students were making a lot of gains, but I always felt like there was like something missing, but I had no idea what it was. And it wasn't until I read this paper by Dr. Bud Craig, who is this brilliant neuroscientist who contributed so much to our world. I read this paper. He was talking about this thing called interoception. And it was the first time I really heard the term before. And I was just like reading about this, and I was like having this like major like epiphany aha moment, like I just felt like there was like light bulbs all over my head. And I'm like, what is this? And I immediately was like, I think interoception is a really big deal for my students. And so I went right to them and I started asking lots of questions. My husband calls me the interviewer. I love asking people questions. I'm so curious about the world and about people's experiences, which is probably why I love interoception so much. So I started asking them lots of questions, asking their families lots of questions. And what we discovered is interoception was a really big deal. And so fast forward now, 12 years later, and I'm like completely hooked into this topic, into this work. It's interoception. I'm sure we'll talk about what it is, but it's just a really exciting field to watch evolve over the last decade. It is hot. There is so much research coming out in neuroscience and medicine right now about interoception. The National Institute of Health declared it to be a research domain of priority. So, it is getting attention. So I'm so excited to have this opportunity to chat with you about it.
I can just see how you got so hooked on this. I feel like just from me reading this paper 2 weeks ago, just putting on that lens, I feel like now I'm seeing it everywhere and thinking about it constantly. And I'm looking back at all these other OT interventions and being like, oh, is that an interoception intervention? And I just wasn't thinking of it that way. Is that what's actually making that effective? I'm so curious in this journey of yours. It's one thing to have a deep interest, and it's another thing to build a curriculum around it and build resources around it. How did that come to be? And was there anything else like it that you were building on? Or did you feel like you were starting from scratch when you built these curriculums?
Yeah, it was definitely starting from scratch. I was searching everywhere for interoception-based strategies and supports. And like you said, it is sprinkled throughout other programs or strategies that we might be using as occupational therapy practitioners. But there was nothing that just went all in helping people connect to their bodies in a really curious way. There's of course body mindfulness, but that wasn't really accessible to a lot of my students for a variety of reasons. And actually, it's not really the traditional westernized body mindfulness is not really accessible to me either. I needed something different. So we started developing all these different interoception strategies, and they were really working. And then people started, and of course I was so passionate. So I'm telling everyone about interoception. They're like, well, what do I do? Tell me, where do I start? What do I do next? What do I do next? Anyone, most people, when they're trying something new, they want kind of a recipe to follow. And then once you get the hang of it, you can make it your own recipe, right? So that's where the interoception curriculum came to be, where people just were I really see the value in this. What help us know what to do first, second, third, et cetera. So I was really hesitant, if I'm to be honest, to write a curriculum as a occupational therapist, because I do it different every time. And I'm sure most OTPs do and can agree with me. So to put it into a framework for someone to follow was really challenging. We got it done. And I'm constantly in all of our trainings, encouraging people to throw out the curriculum once they get the hang of it. Because I really want them to make it their own. I want them to use their clinical reasoning. I want them to be with their clients and and really offer their clients exactly what the client needs, uniquely needs to be able to connect to their body.
I'm definitely seeing that as a trend in the different curriculums that I'm looking at and talking to people where there's like this nice framework to go with, but really prioritizes like individual decision making with the individual child in front of you. And I just love that trend. I think it's so helpful, and that fits so well with how OTs practice. Something that I wanted to ask at the beginning too, to kind of set the stage, was you are so unique to me because like when I Google interoception, you're like, it's like Wikipedia in you. Like you have put this information out there, and I feel like from my vantage point, as I look at the OT world, there's like curriculums that get developed in like academic settings. They really struggle to, like, they spend millions of dollars studying these programs, but they don't really have a real world translation. And then there's OTs on the ground that make like different frameworks, but they don't get studied. And they can still be based on evidence, but they don't really get the research backing behind them. And I feel like you are so unique where you've kind of done both. Like you created something and you're also studying it. Do you feel like you're on a unique path? Like, what's been that experience of both commercializing and researching?
Yeah, I never thought about it to be unique, but now that you're saying it, it probably is.
There's not many Kellys out there.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, the reason that I got into researching the effectiveness of the curriculum, like it's all the reasons you might like think about, like I just want to make sure that, this does work, and how can we like make it better through research. But in my work in the schools, there's such a strong behavior-based focus when a student is struggling, and then in come all the behavioral interventions, because that group of people, they claim to have all of the evidence. And I'm like, I know what I'm doing is working. And so I can't just sit here and say, I know it's working. Like, I just felt like I just felt called to be like putting evidence behind this work so that I can sit at the IEP table, so that I can sit with these teams and say, there is evidence supporting this work too. And so I felt like I just like almost owed it to my students to like start dipping my toe in the research pond, which I didn't want to do. I like kind of was like being drugged. Like I was like, no, but I know it's so important. But now I'm like so hooked, and we have like so many studies like published in the works. So yeah, I felt really strongly called because of the main reason I wanted this work to be able to be equal. I don't know if I'm saying that, if that's coming across clear enough. I want people to be like, oh, there's an alternative to behavior-based interventions, and this also has evidence behind it.
I'm curious, as you like think back to this paper and where you're at now, what stands out to you?
Well, just thinking about this paper makes me smile, just because we had so much fun in this classroom with these students. They were amazing. And the OT students that were on this paper with me, like they had so much fun, using the interoception curriculum in this classroom. So it was just like all around a positive experience for all of us. I hope for the students too. They seem to really enjoy it. And we started out small. I think what is the sample size in this one? I think 9, or was it 9? Yeah. So I mean, obviously we started really small. We made a ton of mistakes early on in our, we called them all pilot studies, because I felt like that gave us a lot of grace to make lots of errors. I mean, we still make mistakes now, but one of the biggest things that like we really are shifting is trying to just do bigger studies. We also are working towards hopefully having a randomized control trial, at least one, hopefully more.
Yeah.
So we're really like looking to be tighter in our research methods, just so that we can continue to like have stronger evidence behind this work. And we also are trying to diversify the populations or the participants that we're looking at using the interoception curriculum with. Like we just did a study with a bunch of autistic adults last summer and had the most amazing outcomes. They reported the most amazing outcomes. Like some of these, participants were in their 50s. They've been through years and years and years of different types of therapies where nothing was really helping them. And then all of a sudden, an 8-week interoception intervention made a statistically significant difference in their lives. So I know we have a lot of tweaking to do to this interoception work, and I can't wait to see how the curriculum evolves over time. But it's really like showing such incredible outcomes for a wide variety of people.
Are you narrowing in on, like, here's the population that benefits the most from this curriculum, or is it broader than you anticipated? How are you thinking about that currently?
It's way broader than I ever thought. Like, I have a friend in Australia who's working in a pain clinic. So this is just, this is with like people with chronic pain. Some might be neurodivergent, but that's like really where I was focusing on when I developed this. This work was for my students that were neurodivergent or maybe had a history of trauma, but like it's so much bigger than I ever anticipated. So really the sky's the limit with this research, I think.
Yeah. That's interesting you mentioned pain, because like that's one of the practice areas I was thinking about the most, being like, I feel like they're doing interoception interventions. Like those are the ones with good outcomes. But I don't know if people are using those words or thinking in that way. Yeah, I am also very excited for where it goes next. I want to get to some practical questions about this. But I wanted to start with just how you are currently describing interoception and thinking about it. I guess I want to know, like, what words you use when you're explaining what it is to someone else. And then follow-up question, as I'm reading, I'm like, is this mindfulness? Is this the same as mindfulness? Is that like a helpful way to think about it? And how do you think about those connections? That's kind of two big questions. Yeah. Okay, I want to know both.
All right. Well, I'll start out with the first question about like how we're talking about interoception. That has really shifted. I'm just going to be like completely vulnerable here. When I first started talking about interoception, I was really in line with like most of the sensory processing literature at the time, how we were trained as OTs 20 plus years ago. Like it was really a medical model where someone might have like typical interoception and someone might have atypical interoception. And as I really started getting more like into this work, I realized like every single one of our bodies are so different, right? So like what your body feels like when you're hungry is likely different than what my body feels like when I'm hungry. And who's to say that like one of us has an atypical experience and one of us has a typical experience? So really like we have shifted big time in the last like 5 or 6 years, and like really being very loud, like that your inner experience is correct and valid. Like whatever your experience is the correct experience for you. And this work is really more about helping each person discover their own interoceptive experience. It's not about helping them achieve a typical state of interoception, because that doesn't exist. It's just like helping each person to just become more connected and understand their bodies in a more unique way. And I'm not saying that in a way. I don't also want to discredit someone that might like have like, let's just say, a muted interoceptive experience when it comes to hunger, and they never notice hunger signals in their body. Like that can be very detrimental to someone's health. And there's things that we can do to either compensate for that or help them to become hopefully better connected to whatever signals are signs for hunger for them. So there are people that really do struggle with interoception. We don't want to like discredit that experience, but we're just becoming a little bit louder. And there's so many people that feel like their experience is wrong. They feel shamed about it, or So I just want people to feel more secure in their own experience so that they feel safe to explore that experience. And I mean, enhancing that experience is good for all of us. At least it has been for me in my personal life, and becoming more aware of my body.
I am not going to be able to come up with this word. Hopefully you can help me. In your previous paper on autism, there was a scientific term for like not feeling your emotions.
Was it alexithymia?
Yes. It was alexithymia. And then I noticed that language did carry over into this next paper. And so I'm curious, are there, thinking of just like OTs and what terms are helpful, are there like those more scientific terms that you're using or not using?
I have a interesting relationship and opinion on the word alexithymia.
Yes, it seems kind of problematic, honestly. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to be careful because I know that sometimes when someone learns that they might be alexithymic, which is referring to difficulty identifying and describing the way they feel, that can be an epiphany for them. That can be very helpful information. Mm-hmm. But where that falls short, in my opinion, is that's so surface. Okay, so you have difficulty identifying, describing the way that you feel, but like, why? Like, again, I'm curious. I'm like, but why? Like, what is the underlying reason so that as an OTP, I can then help, just kind of get to like, we're trained to get to the bottom of it, to like, get to that deep level. And so interoception is one of the primary reasons for alexithymia. So that gives us then a place to start. Then we're like, oh, now I know how to like, perhaps help you with this alexithymia. If that's meaningful to you, I can help with interoception, the interoception curriculum or other interoception-based interventions. That to me is like more helpful than the surface term of alexithymia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was wondering as I was reading that, like that might be a helpful term for some people, but it's also kind of problematic and falls short.
It falls short.
Falls short for sure.
It does. Yep.
This kind of leads into my next question, which I have been so sold on the importance of a strengths-based approach. And also in the research that we've covered, I think specifically we did a big pediatric evidence review by Dr. Novak. And one of her takeaways was just that activity-based interventions tend to have better outcomes than bottoms-up interventions. Like you get better progress by practicing the thing than by practicing the underlying component. But when I look at your work, it feels like you're focusing on the underlying component and it seems to be working. And is that strengths-based? And why does this work when other things where we've focused on the underlying component don't work as well?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, can I just answer the way that it's coming to my mind?
Yeah.
Like if we're taking that framework, essentially, like let's just say you want to work on emotion regulation, right? And so like you're like as an OT previously before knowing about interoception, I might be practicing the activity. Maybe it's like using coping skills or practicing them or, whatever that is. But the thing that we've learned over time is that like so many of our clients are just memorizing these coping skills that we think are a good idea for their body, right? That's what's happening there. Yeah. And when we get to interoception work, we're helping them to notice their body signals, to understand like their body signals and use them as clues to their emotions. And when they're more aware then of how they're feeling, what emotion they're experiencing, that gives them the clue like, oh, like now would be a great time to use a coping strategy. Like, so let's just say they are becoming dysregulated and they're noticing those clues, those unique set of clues in their own body that I'm getting dysregulated. Now would be a great time to use a regulation strategy. And the interoception work too, when someone understands their body better, they are better equipped to connect to coping strategies, regulation strategies, whatever you want to call them, that are helpful to their body. It's no longer me telling them what I think is a good idea. It's them exploring and saying, this works for my body, and this doesn't work for my body, because they have that information coming from their body signals. Like their body signals are saying, this makes me feel comfortable, this makes me feel uncomfortable kind of thing. So I could be proven wrong in the next few years, but right now the way I see it is like we have to start at the very bottom, at the body signal level, and then work our way to the emotion level, and then work our way to the action level or the regulation action level. but I'm biased. Like that's just the way it has come together in my mind, and it's really working for a lot of people. But could it change in the future? Absolutely. I really think it. All of this will shift.
Are you understanding this as with this curriculum, it's helping me understand my unique processing, and then maybe I'm applying my strengths to move forward with that?
Or maybe the strength is that my body is correct and valid. I
yes.
feel like so many of my clients come to me and they have this inner voice, this inner identity that they're broken. They've been, taught all these emotion regulation, social emotional curricula, and it keeps falling short in their life. So their identity is, I am not good at any of that stuff.
This is wrong. Yeah.
Right. This is wrong. And our shift is like, let's help you figure out your own body, because your own body is correct and valid. So to me, that is a strength-based approach.
Mm-hmm. And that's helping me maybe put into words of, it feels like in the past with some of our sensory approaches, we were trying to change how that person experiences the world. And your goal isn't to change it, it's to understand it and build on that.
Yes.
Is that that's why this might be working and what we were doing in the past wasn't working?
Yes. One of the reasons.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
We've touched on this a little bit, but I want to hit it more explicitly and talk about how OTs could use this curriculum in different settings and where you see it being successful. Like, are outpatient therapists doing this with one kid? I can see this in, I have a group or a background in running mental health groups. I could totally see this being a good fit there. And what about our acute care? Yeah, and our pain therapists. Yeah, tell me about the different ways you see it being used and being successful, and maybe how you also see it being adapted.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of different people in different settings using the interoception curriculum. It's more popular in certain settings than others. Like we're working on that advocacy piece. I know it's widely used in schools and outpatient clinics, especially pediatric outpatient clinics.
Yeah.
It's starting to trickle over into the pain space, the pain OT space. I know I have quite a few friends in that space, and I know that interoception is becoming a hotter topic there. And I know it's also being used a lot in the mental health setting. I've heard from people that are in residential treatment programs. They're in acute mental health, hospitals. What I haven't heard, this is what I would love. I haven't heard from anyone using it in a skilled nursing facility or with a geriatric.
I was just thinking that. That'd be so fun.
I think it would be brilliant, honestly, because interoception is so tied to continence. It's so tied to mental health. I just think it could be maybe a preventative program. I think it could be also just a restorative program. I think there could be some interesting research there for OTPs working in that space.
Yeah. Those people, please email Kelly and do that, because that'd be so fun. In the outpatient pediatric clinic, are people running groups, or are they using it just on the individual basis?
Yeah, I've heard in all settings it's both, individual or group. My personal favorite is to do it in a group or a whole classroom, because there's a lot of benefits to it, but what it really concretely shows is that we all have different inner experiences. So when we're doing an activity together from the curriculum, maybe I'm holding an ice pack and you're holding an ice pack and we both have very different experiences in our body. You're just showing time and time again that there's no wrong answer here. Your answer is right for you. So it's just a concrete reminder time and time again that there's no wrong experience. And that's very, very reassuring for a lot of my clients, because, again, getting back to that identity of their body is broken. They don't have the ability to control their bodies. So it's really helping them. And a lot of my clients also, they're always seeking the right answer. because of past programs telling them how their body should feel when they're angry, how your body should feel when you're anxious, how your body should feel when you're happy. So they're constantly searching for the right answer instead of actually connecting to their authentic experience. So when they start to see other people all having different experiences, it's very reassuring. Like, okay, like I can have a different experience and my experience is right. And so that can be really helpful.
I can see utilizing this program being reimbursed by insurance. Do you have stories of that level of it? I know, like, I was an outpatient therapist and did almost all ortho, but every now and then I would get referred a kid with emotional disability and I would have no idea what to do. And I see how I could have layered this on there. Yeah. Do you have stories of that reimbursement or payment?
Yeah, I'm
level?
not an outpatient
Yeah.
therapist. The work I do privately is private pay. So I don't have the insurance. Yeah. So, but I know that there's lots of outpatient clinics out there using it. I just don't know, like, if they're, I don't even want to take a guess because I'm probably going to
that's good.
really unintelligent about it.
Yes.
But however you bill for sensory work, like interoception is a part of sensory work, or it's also a very important part of like toileting, like what you might be doing for toileting or dressing or, whatever ADL that you're thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's ever doing that, email Kelly again. Swinging back to this school setting, I think that's what I want to focus this next question on. What does it take to get a program like this off the ground? Like, who are the people you need to talk to? Where does the buy-in need to be if a school therapist is listening and curious to bring this into their work?
Yeah. For most schools I've been in, it's always that one teacher that just loves OT so much. And I'm like, hey, do I learn something new? It's called interoception. And, just starting so small. Or maybe it's that one student that is really open to what you're doing together. And they might be a good person to kind of start with. But yes, I always try to find the one person that's all in on OT and start there and then just try to build on that. I have been on teams. I just want to say this in case it's reassuring to anyone out there. I have been on teams. I'm actually on a current team right now that does not buy into interoception work. We're trying to shift from that behavioral lens, and I just keep trying to find little areas where I'm like, oh, that could be interoception. Like when the teacher's saying something happened with a student, I'd be like, oh, I wonder if that could be interoception related. I'm just trying to get it out there because it is new. And especially if we're talking about the school setting, educators are overwhelmed. So overwhelmed. So to Bring in one new thing is just it's just really hard in some of the situations and teams that I've been a part of. So I guess that's my long way of saying find the person that's all in, start there, start small, be kind to yourself. And then also just know that this is a big paradigm shift for a lot of people. So if it's not going well, you're not getting the buy-in, you're not alone.
Even when you're tying it to emotional regulation, there's still the pushback you find. You find that still?
So even if you have teams that are not super behavior based, but they're very emotion regulation based. So a lot of emotion regulation programs are cognitive in nature, right? So they require a lot of rational thought. And when our students are dysregulated, they do not have access to their rational parts of their brain. And also they're very focused on emotions and the way emotions should feel. And so many of my students, those emotion words are abstract. They don't really even have a lot of meaning to most students. If you stop and ask, what does anger mean? You might either get a memorized answer that someone told them in the past, or they'll be I don't even know. I don't know. But we're walking around saying, oh, when you're mad, do this. And that's just so meaningless to their experience. So when we put that on pause just for a little bit, I'm not saying there's no room for cognitive-based work or emotions, but we need to rewind a little bit and help each student connect and notice how their body feels first. So noticing those body signals and then using body signals as clues to what emotion they're feeling. So when we do it that way, those students become to understand emotion words, but it's through their own authentic experience. Like they begin to understand what excited means, because I know excited is when my muscles feel jumpy and my voice gets louder. It's personal to them. There's a lot of really cool research emerging that there's no one footprint of an emotion, meaning that again, like what I said, like what your body feels like when you're angry is different than mine. So we can't walk around teaching what an emotion should feel like, because that's not a match to a lot of students. And then we lose them in these interventions we're trying to do.
If a therapist doesn't get the big picture buy-in that they want to around interoception, are there little things they can be doing during their sessions that you feel like would be potent ways for them to just start, even if there's not big picture buy-in?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I would. If you don't have the curriculum, I'd get it. There's so many so the curriculum, I know it's part of the article, I believe, but if you're in section 1 of the curriculum, especially, you can pull little things out of that and just do it during your session. So section 1 is divided into 15 different body parts. So we start noticing the different ways your hands can feel. Well, that's you can do that for 2 minutes at the beginning of your session. You can do that in the middle of your session. If you're hanging on a swing, you're just taking a minute to say, hey, I wonder how your hands are feeling right now. Or you can just go all in and do the whole hand activity that we have designed in the curriculum. But there's definitely little things that you can do to start helping your students become connected, even if you're not getting buy-in from the rest of the team.
Is noticing how your hands would feel, is that where you would start? Or is there a specific body part that people have is the easiest for people to connect those words to?
Yeah, great question. We try to start with outside body parts first, because they tend to be a little bit more concrete, because the not just kids, but all of us, we can see them while we're working on feeling them. And then we work our way to inside body parts that tend to be a little bit more abstract, noticing the way my stomach feels. That's pretty tricky, because I can't see my stomach, or I can't see my heart. So we work with those outside body parts first, noticing how they interoceptively feel, and then work our way to the inside body parts, which tends to be helpful for a lot of people. I also try to think you don't have to start with hands. I just recommend starting with some outside body part, whether it's your nose or, or your feet or whatever it is. I try to think about what body part would be the most neutral to start with a client. So if I know that someone has a lot of feeding differences, and they might have a lot of sensitivities around their mouth, I'm not going to start in this work with noticing how your mouth feels, because that's probably a very overwhelming, intimidating place for someone to start. I just try to think about what could be as neutral as possible, because this work can be so overwhelming to a lot of people that are living in disconnected bodies. They disconnect from their body for a reason. It's a protective response to get through a world that's pretty traumatizing to their experience. So I try to, you have to be trauma informed in this work. And I try to think about how can I help the student feel as safe as possible when we're connecting, when I'm encouraging them to notice how their body feels.
Yeah. So interesting to me, because I feel like a lot of therapists are starting their sessions with either a breath work exercise or a noticing. Yeah. I guess before I was thinking of it as a mindfulness scan to just noticing how you feel. And I see that happening across practice areas. And we're doing that because it works. Or I think people do that because it works and their clients appreciate it. But I don't think we have the language. I don't think most people have the language that you're giving to us of why that works. So I see how therapists can, no matter where you're at, no matter what the buy-in is of your larger organizations, there's little things you can start incorporating. As far as now I'm thinking back to assessment and screens, and kind of circling back to the question of is there an assessment or screen that you see people using to help them like understand who would benefit the most from this?
Well, assessment is one of the biggest debates in the interoception field right now.
Okay.
Nobody
Something spicy. Yeah.
Nobody can decide what is the best way to assess interoception. I do have an assessment tool. It's far from perfect. It's like the best we have right now for pediatrics. But I use it for adults too. But there's some tools that are developed by other people out there that they're used largely in research that are developed for adult populations. So like the adult OTPs out there, you could check those out. But there's nothing available when I was starting this work. So I developed my own tool, and then people started asking, well, can I use your tool? So we ended up, we now sell it on my website. But again, it's far from perfect. But that is something you can do. Or there's just like some signs that would make me just curious as a therapist. Like, could there be something interoceptively going on? Like, if you have any client that is emotionally dysregulated, that's setting off my curiosity. Yeah. Like, and I want to know more about their interoceptive awareness. Toileting, another red flag. I'm like, okay, tell me what's going on. If there's like feeding differences, especially like if they're not noticing when they're hungry or thirsty, or maybe they're high frequency eaters, big signs for me. Like, I want to know more about their interoception. Like if they have body temperature differences, like maybe I've had clients that can go outside on a Pennsylvania winter like day and it's like below freezing, and they could be there naked and not notice that their body's getting cold. Like all of these, like, there's little like signs that would flag my curiosity.
It sounds like you're basically describing every kind of client that we work with. And thinking of the wide-reaching implications of this, I'm curious where you see us going and where you think we need to go. Like, what do you anticipate, I guess, from like a scientific perspective? Like, what are we going to be learning about in the next, or what are we learning about just now that we're on the cusp of? And what's OT's role in this? Like, do we need to be learning this in schools? I mean, it sounds to me like everyone needs to be learning it. So yeah, where is interoception going big picture, and what's OT's role in that?
Yeah, well, I mean, interoception was added to the latest practice act or practice framework. Sorry, OT.
Ooh.
I'm so bad at acronyms. The four that just came out. What did OT stand for?
Yes.
Yes. We worked really hard to advocate it, and it was added. They adopted the definition that was from 1900s. So we're working on getting it more modernized, but I was just happy it's there. So
yes.
The fact that I'm saying that, I mean, it should be a part of OT curricula if it's in our practice act or practice framework. So I'm hoping that, that is the case over the next, 5-10 years. I'm probably biased when I say this, but I do see OTPs being leaders in this work. I feel like it fits so beautifully into everything that we believe in, that we're trained in. It brings in neuroscience, it brings in mental health, it brings in everything that we are so skilled about, and it affects daily living. Like, there's hardly anything that happens during our daily life that does not involve some element of interoception. It is one of our senses. We know all of the 8 senses help us navigate every single thing we do. So I think no matter what setting you're in, it's really important to be at least aware and knowledgeable about interoception. It might not be something that you need to support in every single client, but it is something that I hope that becomes just a general awareness of all OTPs eventually.
I'm hoping that every OTP listening to this is thinking, here's the small things I can be doing in my session, or if I'm already doing it, to have new language to understand why it's working. I hope a lot of us are thinking about how programmatically we could incorporate this into either like our school or a group at our outpatient clinic. The last thing I want you to put in our minds is, like, what should we go read? What do you think would be helpful after this conversation to, like, go read? I know there's free resources out there. What do you think is just the next learning step for someone who's listening today?
I mean, I love free stuff. So
Yeah.
you can go on my website. I'm very passionate about free stuff for people. So we have blogs, we have videos, we have a very active social media presence where we post a lot about interoception to help spread the word. So if you're someone
There's
listening and you're looking for a place to start, it's not the one and only place, but it's pretty comprehensive. So I think that's probably where I would recommend.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, it's so like cognitively exciting for me to think about like the science that's coming to, in my mind, like support a lot of the things that we're already doing. Can you end us with a success story? Like we've talked about this so abstractly. What's a story that you think that you like hold on to about the potential impact of this?
Yeah. Well, the one that's popping in my mind right now was a student I worked with quite a few years ago now. He's an adult now, but his school, he was in 10th grade at the time. His school called me and said, hey, we have this student who was just in a very long-term psychiatric hospitalization. And he's at home now. He's refusing to come to school. He's refusing to do any of the homebound instruction we're sending in. He's locking himself in his bedroom. He's staying up all night playing video games, sleeping all day, he's not leaving his bedroom. So he was like rock bottom, right? He was really struggling. He's autistic. He has a very long history of trauma. So they're like, is there anything you can do? And I'm like, oh, gosh, like this sounds really hard. But I'm like, sure, why not? I'll meet him. I can't promise.
Yeah.
So I went to meet him and oh my gosh, he's just an amazing human being. But it took me a lot of time to build a relationship with him and build trust because I was another therapist coming into his world. You know, he was 15 probably or 16 at the time. He's 10th grade. So he had a long history from earlier intervention on of a lot of therapists in and out of his life, things obviously probably not working given his current status. And so a lot of that relationship building, but then we started dabbling in the interoception work and it became so clear to me. Like I would ask him like, how does your body feel when you're anxious? And he's like, I don't know. I really don't know. Or like, how does your body feel like when you're hungry? And he's like, I have no idea. I really have no idea. He's like, I'll just eat if I see a snack on the counter. It's not like based on the way like his body felt. So we did a lot of work from the Interoception Curriculum. It was not the only thing we did, but it was such a big deal to him to help him like, you know, go through each body part. And we were doing like different fun experiments and learning about how his hands felt, his feet felt, how his, heart felt, his lungs felt, starting to use that new knowledge about his body to connect it to emotion. So so I helped him like learn like, what does anxiety feel like in your body? Like, what is that body signal that's clues to your anxiety? And it turned out to be like a buzzing feeling in the back of his tongue. Like, that's not anything in the previous like programs I was using that I said, okay, when you're anxious, the back of your tongue buzzes. Like, that's not something, right? So it was like just such a process rooted in curiosity. And I was validating his experience every step of the way, which was like a huge shift from any therapist that he's ever worked with. And so fast forward a year into our work, he transitioned back into his traditional school setting. The school invited me to be a part of the rest of his school year because he wanted me to stay on board. So I got to be there for his junior and senior year just as a consult. It was really fun. And like his senior year, the biggest problem he had was that he got invited to the prom by 3 different girls. And he's like, what do I do? I'm like, I don't know. This is out of my I don't know. I do not know. I was like, how does each one make your body feel? So, but he just was able to like really regulate his body so much better because he understood it. He was starting to understand the sensory world and what things like made his body most uncomfortable. So then we could start to problem solve, how to adapt the environment or how to advocate for what your body needs in the classroom. Like he just became so knowledgeable about himself. And so after he graduated, he decided to take a year off before going to school, and he traveled the world independently. And he would send me pictures on his journey. Like there's a picture of him on a camel in the middle of the Sahara Desert. It's like incredible. I'm like, what? Like I love this. I know, it's amazing. When I first met him, not leaving his bedroom, to that time in his life where he was just out in the wide open world. And, not all of my stories are that successful, but that one is like near and dear to my heart. And he does give me the permission to share his story if I promise to tell everyone that although he's leading a very happy life, that every single day is hard work for him, being autistic from a social standpoint, from a sensory standpoint, because we are not at a place in our world yet where we are accommodating of all neurodivergence and brains and bodies. So he does give me permission to share a story with that one fact to share with everyone.
It's been such a just incredible conversation to me to think about how this began with a journal article for you and how the stories that come out of this work. And as you're talking, I see how this kind of intervention positions us as OTs in a spot that we love being, where we get to be curious. I always even use the word delight. We love to just delight in our clients and their uniqueness. And this sets us up to do this. Yeah, this is just incredible. It feels emotional to me at the end even. I'm curious, what's the final thought you want to leave us on today? There's so much we've touched on. What's that last thought you want OTs to have in their mind as they're walking away?
I've said this a couple times in this interview, but I cannot emphasize how important, we hear this from so many people, how important it is for us to be more curious, not assume to understand someone's inner experience, to ask questions, to figure out ways to explore, someone's experience and sit with that privilege if they are going to trust you enough to share what's happening for them, to really sit with that privilege and realize that you are it's such a gift to be an OTP and be a part of this process, and to make sure you're validating their experience, because so many of my clients have unintentionally had their inner experiences invalidated, and I was a part of that invalidation. I still am. I'm working really hard to update myself. So I just can't speak to the power that we could have in empowering. I just said power and empower. So it's just such a gift. I feel so privileged to be with my clients and to be a part of their journey in discovering themselves and to developing positive stories about themselves, and to be able to understand themselves enough to be able to self-advocate and to start to shape the world in a way that help their bodies feel as comfortable as possible.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for your curiosity and how you followed it, for the research that you're doing, for the resources you're putting out there. This, honestly, to me, feels like the beginning for myself of a new way of looking at OT, something really deep and foundational. And yeah, I'm just so thankful for the time today.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me here. And I love your questions. So it's been really fun.
Thank you. Wow, you all, this hour just felt like an incredible journey for me. I learned so much about interoception. And like I said, I am using this new knowledge already to go back and think about so many OT interventions differently. I can really see this underlying so many of the things that we have found to be effective in the past. And I hope for all of us that this is just the beginning of our journey into understanding interoception. As Kelly mentioned, there are so many free resources that you can now dive into, and I will be linking to some of my new favorites in our show notes. And as always, I just so appreciate hearing what your thoughts are. If you are a casual listener, we would love a review from you. You can now review us on Google from our homepage, or we always appreciate your comments on our YouTube video. But the best place to really discuss the implications of this is in the OT Potential Club, and I will be watching for your comments in our forum. The OT Potential Club is also where you will go to earn a CEU certificate for your time today. So what you are going to do next is head to otpotential.com and either sign in or sign up for the OT Potential Club. Once you are in there, you can take a 5-question test, and when you pass, we will generate a certificate for your time today. Okay, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this podcast helps keep you informed and inspired as an occupational therapy professional. Take care, and we'll talk next time.